Please put your hands together for Tim Baker, ladies and gentlemen. Tim Baker.
Hi everybody, so yeah, my name's Tim Baker. I teach Scottish literature up in Aberdeen, and the first thing you're noticing about me is that I'm not Scottish. I'm from Baltimore, and yes, before you ask, I do watch The Wire, but I'm from the John Waters part of Baltimore, and if you'd be interested, I can do some demonstrations of my Hairspray-inspired dance moves later. But being an American studying Scottish literature can get some sort of odd reactions. I don't know how many of you have flown to America recently. It's a completely disorientating experience. I've lived over here about a decade now, but the first time I flew back, I was just, absolutely exhausted. I was sort of hungover from the cheap gin they serve you and the cheap animation you're watching. And you're standing in this endless queue in the entry hall, and there's a looping video overhead. Every 5 minutes it repeats, and it's filled with children with big smiles on their faces. They're saying, "Welcome to America," and shots of wheat fields, because that's apparently what we do best. But there are also men in the entry hall, and they're not smiling at you. They're not saying, "Welcome to America." And they have guns. They have big guns. But eventually you get to the front of the queue, and the security guard asks you what it is you do in Scotland. And you say, well, sir, I study Scottish literature. And he glances at you for a while, and he sort of casually just rests the heel of his hand on his gun. And he says, so, your own literature isn't good enough for you, then? But you can get some odd sort of hostility over here. You'll be in a pub talking to a stranger, and they'll ask what you do, and if you're lucky, you can have a nice little short conversation about why you think Walter Scott is so great and why they really don't. And if you're unlucky, you might have to listen to some Burns songs. But where things get tricky is when you confess what you actually do is you study contemporary literature. And again, you'll get this glare, and they'll say, what, so you're paid to sit around and read Ian Rankin all day? And you say, yeah, well, I am, but I read that Ian Rankin really hard. But I've been reading a lot of Ian Rankin over the last few years, a lot of much worse stuff, novels of 18th century Edinburgh being overtaken by zombie dogs. Because I've been writing a book on contemporary Scottish Gothic. It's actually technically out today. I have not seen a copy, given the price of academic monographs. You probably never will either. But I was working on this project on Scottish Gothic, and I learned something really very useful. At some point in your life, you're going to have a small crisis. Maybe you've just had a baby, maybe you're just tired of your job, but you're going to decide the best thing you could possibly do is to move to the Hebrides. Maybe you'll fix up a guest home, but you want to move someplace deserted. Maybe St. Kilda would be best. And you'll have this turbulent ferry ride over there, and the locals will be giving you suspicious glares, giving you sort of these knowing glances, but you'll get there and you'll have this awful night in a drafty house. And in the morning you want to make a fresh start. And so you'll go out into the garden and you'll dig up a dead baby. And sometimes this might be a relative of yours. It might be a very recent death. Sometimes it might be much older. Sometimes it might be a mermaid or a selkie. I read dozens of novels that told me, whenever you garden in the Hebrides, you're going to dig up the skeleton of a child. This is a very weird thing to do for a living. You wake up in the morning, you have a cup of tea, you walk to work, you read about dead babies every day. But I've been trying to figure out why there are so many dead babies in Scottish literature. What strikes me is this, that Gothic is always a way of trying to talk about the things we don't have words for. It's a way of trying to voice the things we're most scared of. And you don't have to be over-literal with this. It's not that Twilight was such a huge success because suddenly everyone developed this great fear of sparkles. But no, it's that there's this sense that we want to say something about our past that we can't quite voice, that we have this fear of a past that has been cut off before we learned even what it was. And that when Scottish writers think of the things that scare them most, it's not aliens, it's not werewolves with dripping fangs, it's something intimate, it's something personal. The Inverness-based crime writer from the mid-century, Josephine Tay, says that Scotland must be a great place to get away with murder. She also says immediately in the following passage that all Scottishness must be balanced with sensible Englishness. So I'm not saying we should take her as a guide, but this idea of death is really prevalent throughout Scottish literature, from Walter Scott to Ian Rankin on. And you don't need your dead babies to be crawling on the ceiling, like in Train Spotting or something, in order to see what's going on here. There's something absolutely personal here. We talk a lot in my field about the death of the novel. It's something that's always around us. And this is a really strange phenomenon. You put a bunch of economists in a room, and you say, I'm sorry, no one understands what it is you do or why it's important. And they'll say, aha, at last, we've achieved world domination. But you say this to authors, and they just sort of sigh and shake their heads and say, I wish I'd spent more time on my gardening. But this idea of the novel as a way to look at the way that death is always with us, I think is really important. And the way that we can use it to look at not just who we were in the past, but who we are now, who will become. I think it makes even the trashiest of literature really valuable. But again, I think it also has a real practical use. Because the next time at an airport and the security guard asked me why it is I do what I do, I think telling him that I really am just interested in dead babies, I think I'll get me some security treatment.
Once more for Tim Baker!